Good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for joining the SAGTA webinar this afternoon on such a topical issue. We are hugely excited to welcome Aubrey Golightly from NWU, as well as our own Ashley Govender. They're going to introduce themselves a little bit. So before I hand over to Aubrey, I just want to quickly remind everyone, if that's not a problem, just on how we are going to go through this presentation. Okay, so it is already the 7th webinar, and we're so excited because they seem to work so well. Okay, so we know that it's been a long year. I saw this earlier and I just thought it was brilliant. It kind of made me think that we might get there soon. It's already October, but anyway, so I know there's a lot of teachers who are finding it quite long to get to the end of the year, and I'm sure the last little bit of this year will soon be there. Okay, just a reminder, please, if you don't mind, just to keep yourself muted when the presenters are speaking so that we don't have background noises. Please, can we ask you to put all the questions in the chat, because even if you ask them aloud, we like to go back and just go and check exactly what is the general idea and what we can maybe work on in the future. It's the best to keep your video off for streaming. If you are struggling with your connection, it's also going to use less data. And so thank you for joining us. And if you're not a SAGTA member, we do encourage you to join us, please. Yay. And then just a reminder, if you are a SAGTA member, you will have access to all of the resources. If you're not a SAGTA member yet, you still have some chance to check all the resources. They are available then on the website. If you go to the SAGTA website, sagta.org.za, you will see online teaching resources, and all today's resources are placed in the webinar folder, and you were able to access that. And then that little PDF there will have the link for you to go and rewatch this recording afterwards. So it's all there, very easy for you to see, and also the membership forms if you need them. Okay. So thank you so much for joining us. And Aubrey, it's all up to you now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ineke. I'm Aubrey Golightly, all the way from Potchefstroom. So I feel sorry for you because you have to listen to my Potchefstroom English. So sorry for that. But that is part of being a geographer. I actually want to say thank you to Pam, Clinton, Ashley to get me involved in this active learning, if I can call it a project. I focus mostly on problem-based learning in our geography teachers training here at the Northwest University Potchefstroom campus. So I'm looking forward to share some of the information regarding problem-based learning, as well as some of the activities that we implemented in our teachers training. So thank you. I'm really looking forward to this half an hour. And then from there, Ashley will take over and he will also discuss activities and also problem-based learning examples. So thank you for that. Now, first of all, I just want to see now. There it is. If you actually look at that PowerPoint slides, you will see there, we have to challenge our learners to think.
Aubrey, sorry,
yes?
Can you just quickly share your screen first?
Sorry?
Just go to that green screen share. On the Zoom meeting.
Zoom, okay.
You just need to reshare it from the start again, because.
Okay, so I have to go in again, okay. So.
Are you if you're in your Zoom, yeah, if you're in your Zoom, that green button that you used just now when we just checked it, you can just go back to that one and redo that again.
Okay, just want to see now because it's now, okay, there it is, share the screen, okay, there it is. Okay. Okay, can you see it now, Inge?
Yes, awesome, thank you so much. Yes, just put your presentation on and then that's perfect, thank you.
Okay, so I have to go to that one there. Okay. Okay, is it fine?
Yes, thank you so much.
Okay. So, thank you, Ineke. If you can see there, I think we have to challenge our students to start thinking for themselves and only not memorized information. So now, the only way that you think is when you're confronted by a problem. Now, I always joke and say, if I receive my salary, then my problem usually starts and I have to see how I can solve that problem. Now, this lady was voted as the best teacher in the world a few years ago. And she said there, we need children to be problem-solving generation. And unless we teach them problem-solving skills, which come from the creative subjects, it won't happen. And I believe that geography actually is a subject that we can use problem-based learning very effectively. Now, people solve problems in various ways, and there you can see. I'm not sure for how long, but yes, I agree. We have to start training people to solve problems in a better way. There you can see, looking at that pictures, some of them are very, very, how can I say, not worried about their safety. Now, if you look at this, you can see there for the last 23 years, we already have a constructivist approach in our schools with the acceptance of OBE. And we want active learning to be promoted in our classrooms. Why? Because active learning usually develop 21st century skills. It includes problem solving, critical thinking, communication, collaborative learning, and self-directed learning. And unfortunately, in most of our classes in South Africa, not referring to geography in general, most of the teachers are teacher-centered, where they're using lectures and demonstrations, and in some cases, even reading from the textbooks. So we have to change that. Now, if we look at this Bloom's taxonomy, the revised one, you can see there, if we go on with the typical traditional instruction, lecturing and demonstrations and all of that, we will only help achieve the first two cognitive levels. We need project-based learning, problem-based learning, and all of that to also achieve higher order thinking and higher order cognitive levels. Now, I always use this slide with my students. And if you see, there is 3 styles if you're looking at teaching and learning interaction in classrooms. Now, style A, look at the communication. That is now indicated by the arrows. The teacher and the arrows is pointing away to the learners. That is typical your direct teacher instruction. Then you have your behavior shaping style or model, and look at the arrows there. There's communication between the teacher and the learner. Typical answering, question and answering, and asking them to do something and reporting back in class. And then when you go to the style C, you will see there, look at the arrows between the learners. There is very important, there's also communication between the learners. Now, if I ask geography teachers or I ask my geography students here, which of that styles are most prominent in our geography classrooms when they go to practical teaching or the work integrated learning? They say to me, definitely style A and B. Now, I have to say all 3 of them are very important. I don't say style C is better than style A and B, but we have to integrate all 3 of them in our classrooms. And if you look at style C, that will be typical teaching and learning strategies that involve learners like inquiry-based learning, cooperative learning, collaborative learning, and then project and problem-based learning. There is the teacher is a facilitator, and there's communication and discussions going on between the learners. And I believe that what's missing at this stage in some of geography classrooms in South Africa is that style C. We have to focus more in new teaching and learning strategies that can help actually achieving that. Now, research indicates that teachers in most successful educational systems employed a range of teaching and learning methodologies. In other words, they integrate various teaching and learning strategies from the teacher-centered up till the self-directed or learner-centered strategies and methods. Now, interesting, why PBL? And in 2016, I was at Quebec in Canada, and they actually have the International Charter on Geographical Education actually launched there and published there. And very, very important is that in that they say we have to start looking into research in problem-based learning. And I say there, it is important that we provide teachers with the necessary skills to implement active teaching and learning strategies in classrooms, and they emphasize problem-based learning. And luckily for me, I was then already for 5 or 6 years involved in PBL in the geography teachers training year. So I believe that is the way to go. Now, just a quick look at the CAPS, and I think you all know that. But if you look at the general aims in the CAPS, you will see there is solve problems, make decisions, members of a team, organize and manage themselves, collect and analyze, organize, critically evaluate information. They have to communicate effectively, and so on. So that is important. We have to keep that in mind. And then as well, if you look at the grade 10 to 12, you will see there some of the specific skills they refer to is identifying questions and issues, collecting and structuring information, making decisions and judgment, deciding on a point of view. Very interesting, suggesting solutions to problems and work cooperatively and independently. Now, if you look at the general aims and you're looking at this, I believe the best way to do it is through problem-based learning. If you use problem-based learning, you will help achieve all that aims and help to achieve and develop the different skills mentioned in the CAPS. Interesting, in all the sub-disciplines of disciplines around the world, engineering, medical education, nursing, and so on, they're all using problem-based learning. What's worried for me is that only a few studies refer to problem-based learning in teacher education, and they're not even referring to secondary and primary schools education. Now, problem-based learning, as I mentioned to you, is part of active learning. And it is also then, if you look at in that big circle, active learning, and then you have inquiry-based learning. And with inside that circle, you have problem-based learning. So problem-based learning basically is active learning. You have to use inquiry-based learning there as well. And then you will have to solve a problem, working in groups and looking for your own resources. Now, typical definitions that we can actually refer to for PBL, I say as a problem forms the basis of the organized focus of the group and stimulates learning. It is student-centered, as I mentioned to you earlier on. Learning is done in small student groups, ideally 4 to 6 students. And here's very important, the facilitator or the tutor guides the students or the learners rather than teaching them. The problem, I mentioned that already as well, is the vehicle for development of problem-solving skills. It stimulates the cognitive process. And then there's also new knowledge is obtained through self-directed learning. Now, what makes problem-based learning very different is that in this case, they have to formulate their own learning issues. Now, I want to look at the PBL process, because if you're not doing this, you're not doing problem-based learning, then maybe you're doing problem solving, and there's a huge difference between that. Now, first of all, in a PBL process, they usually refer to it as the 7-jump approach or so. But in this case, you present a real-world, ill-structured problem. Now, the real world is, in other words, it's not a fake problem. It is something that happened around the student's environment or in the environment or in town. It's a real-world problem. Ill-structured means there is more than one solution to that stated problem. It's not only a yes or a no answer. There is more than one solution to that, and all of them can be right. As I mentioned to you, they're working in small groups, collaboratively, the learners. Then, first of all, when you present them the problem, they have to go and discuss the problem and discuss and say, what is the problem? In other words, they have to demarcate the problem. After that, they must ask themselves, what do we need to know to solve this problem? And then they have to formulate their own learning issues. Later on, I will give you an example of a PBL activity as well as a PBL problem. And then I will also show you some of the learning issues that was developed by my students in my class. After I formulated these learning issues or learning objectives themselves with the help of a facilitator, then they have to go and do research on them and select and study literature in achieving that lesson objective. After this period of self-study, students share and critically evaluate their findings. Now, they have to discuss, compare, debate, and when they actually think they are now ready and they know everything about the problem, only then can they actually start formulating solutions to the stated problem. Now, all of this they are doing in a PBL report. So later on, I will just refer back to that as well. Now, the role of the facilitator is definitely not anymore the information giver or the information conveyor. He's basically a facilitator who have to stimulate discussion in the groups. If necessary, especially at school level, he can provide relevant information. You have to evaluate the progress of the groups and monitors to which extent each group member doing their part, as well as the end, you have to assess the final PBL report. Now, in PBL, the group members can fulfill various roles. Now, my suggestion is when you start with PBL, you only have one or two of them, but later on, you will start to elaborate on that and you will actually involve more learners in different roles. But the most important for me at this stage is basically your group leader, as well as your scribe, and then sometimes a person who can actually timekeeper and so on. The rest, later on, you can actually involve them in that roles. Some people say, yes, it's only for higher education and higher institutions to do this. Unfortunately, if you look at literature, they start already in grade 1 in some of the countries with grade 1 learners, and with very successful results. There you can see, look at all involved in that PBL problem. Now, I believe the facilitator has to guide and support the learners during the PBL process. Not teaching them, but support and guide them. And then very, very important, we also have to challenge the learners to take responsibility for their own learning. So you have to let go. They have to decide what is the learning objectives or learning issues, what sources are going to use, how we will solve this problem. So that is, I think, one of the major challenges and for our teachers and learners is this new learning environment. Now, in literature, there is various formats, but I just kind of focus on two. You get your pure PBL learning format, and you get your hybrid problem-based learning format. Now, the pure problem-based learning format is like the McMaster University in Canada, where they, from their first year up till their 7th year in a medical education, they only use problem-based learning. So that is the pure one. Now, I believe when we start with our learners in schools, and it is their first encounter with PBL, then we will have to rather use the hybrid PBL. Now, in the hybrid problem-based learning, you can see there, the facilitator can provide students with necessary guidance and support during PBL process during direct instructional methods, such as mini lectures and demonstrations. In other words, they actually is a combination you're using in the PBL process. You're using also direct instruction methods. So it's typical, the hybrid between the two. Now, I don't want to focus this afternoon on this, but it's also important to indicate to you that we at the Northeast University already was involved our students in online PBL, where they have to do their whole PBL report on Google Docs. And that means they can work from different locations in South Africa simultaneously, but also working independently on the same document. And that with great results as well. I personally believe that you first of all have to involve them in face-to-face, and then after a few activities with that, then you can actually move to online PBL. Now you can see there on Google Docs, the tutor can be an observer and you can see how they're progressing during the PBL report that they are busy compiling. And interesting is that you can also make comments on that Google Docs. There's also a revision history that you can look and see over the last 4 or 5 days, how they are progressing. 5 days ago, what did they do? You can even see which student did what. And that is the most important for me. How? Because they're using different colors. When they start typing on that Google Docs, each group member will use a different color. For example, he will type in red, the other one in blue. So I just want to give you some of the learning management system here. We call it Efundi at the Northeast University. And there you can see there how they are working, all 5 or 6 group members working simultaneously on that PBL report. And there you can see on the right-hand side, there is the students, and they are actually using different colors. That is the color that if I start typing, that color will actually show that is now Mr. Orange or Mr. Africa, whatever. So that is the nice thing about Google Docs. Even if I now see group 1 was starting with the problem delimitation or demarcation, and I'm not happy with that, I can actually, with a comment, I can actually try and help and assist them and say, but rather look at this and rather look at that. So I can also guide and support them, even if it's online. So that is just to say to you, we can do it face-to-face in class. I prefer that, but it's also now with technology, there's also new ways, and the students enjoy it much more online learning than, for example, the face-to-face PBL. Now, in geography teacher training, you can see there's not a lot of PBL research in teacher education, and that includes primary and secondary education in South Africa and also around the world. Most of them are in other disciplines. Now, there's only a few studies over the last how many years? I think it's about 2 or 3 researchers are doing in teacher education who are doing research in that. Now, what is the possible reasons for that? Maybe it is totally different for them. For some people, it's moving away from where they are the authoritative figure in the class, because he must now be the facilitator and the guide, and not anymore the person who have to tell them and inform them and so on. Some of the schools are exam driven, so people are just working and teach for their exams. And also it challenges dominant cultures of university and school teaching, where the roles is still different from what we expected in PBL. So why PBL? And I promise you, looking at some of my classes, 3 o'clock in the afternoon here at the Northwest University, you can see when I actually giving a lecture, you can see most of my students getting well rest that afternoon. So there you can see that is just an example that we're using here at the Northwest University in my second year. I was always using a lecture to explain to them land reform in South Africa. And then I decided, no, we have to start developing and planning PBL activities. And that was my first one that I actually was planned and designed. And in this case, you can see dealing with land reform in South Africa. First of all, it is a real world topic, especially for South Africa. And you can see there is more than one solution to that. And there clearly, I have to advise the South African government in developing a plan and strategies to secure more agricultural land for Black farmers without negatively influence food production here. So that is the challenge. Now, interesting, we're working here in groups, and it is usually white students and Black students from different backgrounds. And the whole time I have to say, yes, you have to focus on the problem, because sometimes I want to bring in the politics and so on, and we have to focus on the problem. Earlier on, I mentioned to you that now, after they read this PBL activity, the problem, they have to now develop their own learning issues or learning objectives. Now, here is some of the learning issues that the students in the various groups identified before they can start to provide solutions to the problem. First of all, they must know what is land reform. Ask an American, he won't be able to answer that. Then the second one, they must know something about the history. Why is more land belong to white farmers? Then they have to provide reasons why land reform is necessary now in South Africa, why we need more land reform in South Africa. They must also highlight some of the negative consequences that land reform could have on South Africa if government does not execute it in a discrete manner. What is the progress from since 1994 up till now? They must identify possible reasons, factors that delay the land reform process in South Africa. Only when they know everything about this, then they can start looking for possible solutions to the stated problem. Now, in your PBL report, you have to, your first heading will be definition, land reform, or define the concept. Then the students will go and do self-research, coming back with all the information they got on the internet, in articles and so on, and they will answer that, comparing and discussing their answers so they can get an answer to write down there. That will be in the report with necessary sources that is quoted correctly in the discussion. They will move to the next one. And so they will do it for all the bullets there, up to the last one when they start now. Now we know everything about this. This can take a few hours. Usually I'll be working about 2.5 weeks on the problem like this. So then I provide solutions to the stated problem. And that is the very important thing, is that you as the facilitator have to assist and guide the students in how to formulate these learning issues, asking the questions, pertinent questions, so they know what to do. There's another one that I'm also using with my urban geographers, where they have to look at this, formulate their own learning issues, and then go do research. And by doing that, compare the different group members, their information. If I can just go back to the previous one. In the old days, I only was using 2 or 3 articles in discussing land reform in South Africa. But using this way, remember now I have about 80 students in my class. They all go and look for sources dealing with land reform. sometimes I come back with excellent articles. And even I can become a co-learner in the whole process. And I can ask them, please, can I get that article? So instead of only 2 articles that we discussed with land reform, now all of a sudden we have over 200 articles, most recent articles in the South African context, and we can use and we can share that information as well. So it means much more deeper learning and meaningful learning. So that is one of the advantages of PBL. Now, just to move a little bit, how can I say, more to school, and I thought maybe I must just get 1 or 2 examples. Ashley will later on explain to you in more detail also a PBL scenario or PBL activity that he also developed. So you can see there in my case here, I looked at development geography for grade 11s, and I use this one with my third years as well. So where they actually have to ensure that development aid give rise to sustainable development. And the next one, the one in yellow, I got on the internet, where they're also now dealing with, you can see the World Bank, that your country needs are great and you deserve a loan. And by doing that, they actually are now provided with a problem and they have to solve that problem. So that is just 2 examples from the geography grade 11. Ashley will later on mention more examples. Now, usually people ask, but and the assessment, now in problem-based learning environments, you can see they have to compile a PBL report. In other words, they must basically answering all that learning issues that I mentioned in a report with the necessary sources, as well as at the end, they must have a reference list. So that is the main, how can I say, report that I have to do. And it also counts most of the final marks for this. Then, in my case, I always ask my groups, the different groups, to please come and present for me in a PowerPoint only the solutions that they actually stated and formulated for that problem. Once again, to the class. In other words, everyone can now listen, and that will also, for example, giving them more information. Because sometimes I can ask that same question I can ask in the exams, and they have to make notes and they have to keep up to date with all the newest information on that problem. Then lastly, I will give you now examples, show you examples as well, but it's also important that we start actually involving our students in peer and self-assessment so that we know what was each one's contribution in or performance in this PBL activity. Now, who's better to ask who did their part or do not? It's the learners, so we have to involve them. So there, you can see there that we have the assessment rubric, and that was for the third one, dealing with the health conditions in informal settlements. So usually you provide this assessment rubric at the beginning. You provide the groups with this and say, listen, yeah, I'm going to use this assessment rubric to assess your PBL report. But you will see it's also basically aligned with what you suppose is the PBL process. You will give marks for the demarcation of the problem, formulating of the learning issues or objectives, the scope and the quality of the provision research, the use of recent literature, and also providing solutions. So all of that counts to the final mark for the PBL report. So that is the one that we use here, and they have to receive this before they start with the PBL activity. This one I received from the McMaster University. I phoned the guy, Dr. Woods, and he said, I'm more than welcome to use this. This is just an example of a self and a group a peer assessment rubric that we can use, and to make sure that each person actually have his say in how he sees his own contribution as well as the group members' contribution in this. So you can see that they have to evaluate or assess their own contribution, the self, and then all the group members in his group. They have to write down the name in the top column there or block, and they have to evaluate them, looking at leadership, cooperation, initiative, and attitudes, effort, all that they have to look in, and they have to give a mark out of 10. Now, what happened now is, as soon as learners or the students starting get used to peer and self-assessment, and it becomes more accurate, then you can start using that as well to contribute to the final grade that you will give for the PBL activity. So that is how I'm using this as well, to see which group members didn't do their part and they are penalized by using this information. I just want to give you a little bit of feedback. I have a questionnaire, or PBL questionnaire, developed with Osvaldo Minis from America. And one section there deals with general knowledge about PBL. So I asked my students, my geography teacher students here, a few questions. And I have to say they strongly agree, 1, or they have to strongly disagree, or strongly agree, a 5. And you can see there, looking at that, most of the students, there's around about 80 of them, were very positive. And they say, for example, I mastered new knowledge through PBL, and they got it 4.32 out of 5. And you can see all of them are higher than 2.5. But interestingly, as you can see, the lowest one here is, I prefer PBL above the traditional lecture-based teaching strategies, got 3.24. So some of the students and learners are not so sure if that is the best way. Why? Because they said to me, sir, we actually have to work now much harder, and it is all the responsibility on us to make sure that we learn. So that is some of the things I mentioned. They prefer the old ways because then they work less, it seems to me. Now, I want to finish with this. We can go on normally in South Africa using lecturing and questions and assignments and all of that. But we also have to look at new alternative ways to do this. And it's very important that we have to start using new teaching learning strategies like PBL. And I believe if we start doing that, only one activity maybe in a semester or maybe in a year. And as we're getting more familiarized with this and more skilled in that, then we can start doing it more. But I believe there's no way that we can go, not implementing problem-based learning if we want to foster 21st century skills. The most important thing for me is that before you start with implementing this problem-based learning, is that you have to familiarize yourself. What is PBL? The whole PBL process, the roles and that. And then you also have to train your learners. During half an hour, you have to train them and tell them what are their responsibilities during the PBL. Only then can you start. Just a reminder, in the beginning, you will get a lot of resistance. People don't want to do that and they are negative. But we implement it in our university from the first year for 6 weeks up till the 4th year, 6 weeks. And you know, they start in the first year and they're not sure what to do. And in your 3rd and your 4th year, it is so easy. They just walk into class, looking at the problem, start with the whole PBL process. So if I can say, I think this is a real way, a way. I think most of us sometimes are doing it, not even if we know about it, but we are doing it. I think Pam also mentioned it, that she's doing it for years. But I think most of the geography teachers and in my environment or our area are not doing it. And we have to start looking into ways how we can start implementing, as requested by the World IGU, International Geography Union, to implement problem-based learning. From my side, thank you. Just, if you want to know more, there is my email, and it will be nice to hear what people say about this and their opinions. Thank you. Ashley?
Yep, thank you very much, Audrey, and I'll start sharing my screen now. And I think you need to stop yours first before I can start sharing my screen.
So I just say, okay.
It'll say stop sharing.
Okay, there's stop sharing. Oh, there it is. Okay, yeah.
There you go. Cool. Thank you very much. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Ashley Govender, and while I'm busy getting my screen sorted out, I'll be able to introduce myself. I am a teacher. I teach at a high school in Bryanston. I've been teaching now for 27 years. And I basically started this search, and I'm going to switch off my camera because I was playing around with the virtual backgrounds and I kind of made it, I didn't have enough time to get rid of it. So please forgive that issue. During the beginning of lockdown, I just asked the question, why am I teaching the way I teach? Why is it that I'm pushing out PowerPoints and asking questions and answers and expecting feedback? And it didn't make sense to me. And I started to research activity-based learning, problem-based learning, and through a series of God-directed steps, I come in contact with people like Eneke, Pam, Clinton, and Audrey. And suddenly we noticed that, oh, there's a common understanding of that we need to do things differently, and therefore I started to pursue that. And with the help of Audrey, been able to now begin to understand what problem-based learning is all about. And I started doing that for myself in my own school. And I essentially, during lockdown, rewrote all the materials for grade 8 and grade 10 from the beginning of the year right to the end. And I started doing that. And so I'm going to share some of that with you. And some of it, the problem-based learning example has been very capably and very kindly adjusted and edited by Audrey, and he walked me through that process because, like you, I'm learning. I'm not a master of these things. I'm just a teacher who's trying to say, can I do this differently? So if you are ever looking to blame somebody for what we are going through now, it would be me. I actually started this whole thing, and I'm hoping that as I show you what I've done and I demonstrate my activities, that each one of you will be encouraged to walk alongside and actively engage with SAGTA on embarking on this new process, because we have to do something differently. And when we look at this, we ask obviously the question, so why are we doing this? Because what was wrong with what we were doing? And I came up with these 5 basic ideas. And the first one I think is critical, where it says we are teaching for the 4th industrial revolution, which is the new term that's being bandied around. And when you look at how we teach traditionally, it is pre-1st industrial revolution. And how can you use a method that is pre the 1st industrial revolution to create 4th industrial revolution skills? And that for me was the biggest thing, like how can we teach in this way and still expect to have the kind of people we desire in the future? I also noticed that we need to begin to engage our learners in the learning process. They can't just be sitting there. And I noticed that during lockdown as well, when we were pushing information out to students via PowerPoint, etc., they simply didn't bother looking at it. They just simply, oh, I got it, and then didn't bother. Or they just sat there and clicked through it and didn't read it. Internationally, you'll notice subjects like computer application technology is non-existent. And the reason for that is they expect IT skills to be integrated into every single subject across every single learning area, not just a subject. So students must be able to use various apps and various programs in their learning environment. And I'll show you how I've done that in my examples, but hopefully that'll give you some idea. And I want to increase the love for my subject. I love geography. I did it in school, and I'm teaching it now for 27 years. And I want students to love my subject. I want them to take it. I think geography is one of the best subjects you could ever take. You know, today I had a situation where I asked my students, how many of you do, I was in a class for an exam, and I asked, how many of you do geography? And none of them put their hand up. I said, oh, so there's nobody smart enough. They didn't like that, but it was funny for me. So I want to be able to achieve the aims of the National Curriculum Statement, the aims of critical thinking, problem solving, etc. And when we look at what I've done and how I've approached this, the approach I've used is very developmental, because I understand that we are not where the international community is. We need to develop. So my approach is very developmental, and I want to introduce the method, but not shock and awe everybody with suddenly doing problem-based learning, but rather let's work at slowly introducing this method and slowly introducing and creating for ourselves independent learners and what Audrey will refer to as self-directed learners. So my approach and the principle that I'm applying for this is actually the principle of a learner-centered education. It has to be learner-centered. It cannot be teacher-centered, because I am not the expert. I am not the end-all be-all, but rather my students need to engage with me. And therefore, I have to be learner-centered. I have to be sensitive to their needs and where they are. And when I was preparing this, obviously, there has to be some kind of big idea that I want to work with. And my big idea is this. I want to engage learners. So I decided, okay, I want to use creative page borders, because it creates visual interest. It draws them in. I want to use color. I want to be true to the curriculum that I'm expected to teach. My activities must not just be Q&A. It mustn't just say, oh, you got the right answer, clever boy, clever girl. But rather, my learning must enhance the process. It has to. It has to enhance their understanding. It must allow learners to engage. I'm a public school teacher. I've always been a public school teacher, and therefore I would suggest that the content must be based upon the public school setting. It must be able to be adapted to the poor school, the school that's average, and the school that's working in the digital space. All my lessons that I've demonstrated now come from the grade 8 curriculum and the grade 10 curriculum, and my PBL lesson is from the grade 10. So hopefully, as I go through this, you'll get a better understanding of how I've worked through these various scenarios of activity-based learning and problem-based learning in a school. The first lesson I'm going to show you guys is what I took from the grade 8 curriculum, longitudes and latitudes. And before we dig into this, I just need to point out that the grade 8 curriculum only requires that students work with degrees and minutes, not degrees, minutes, and seconds, only degrees and minutes. So therefore, the content has to be appropriate for that. And very often, as teachers, what we do is we go, oh, but they need degrees, minutes, and seconds in matric. So we start teaching it in grade 8. And that's where the problem comes in. We now then begin to speak way beyond what our students are actually capable of understanding. So stick with what the curriculum says. It is developmental in its structure and its writing, and the method being applied is developmental. So I'm saying to us, let's do that. Let's stick to what the curriculum wants, not jump ahead to what we expect for the matric. And that, what Audrey said, is that we don't implement new methods because we are geared towards exams, questions and answers. So this will be part of the process to stop thinking in that way, but rather to implement what the curriculum actually requires. My activity, I called it map grid and know how it works. And when you look at this, I'm not asking students questions, but rather I'm asking them to engage. Now, obviously the background behind this lesson plan is that the content has been presented. We have given them the information, but now we're saying, okay, engage with what you know. And so you got this little activity. And again, you notice the colorful page boundaries and you'll notice the emoji in the corner. All that is to basically get students to engage with it. And the first 4 questions are relatively straightforward. It kind of says, okay, do you understand how the grid works in terms of degrees and minutes? When you look at question 5, it then says, okay, now that you understand how this works, do you understand how to apply it to a map? And I've used this map and I've used this map. And I've used 2 maps on purpose because I want students to be able to be exposed to as many different maps as possible. Sometimes we don't do that. We only expose them to topographical maps because that's what you need in matric. So learn it now. And we need to help them understand different maps, different scales, different purposes of it. Question 5 in the question activity says, okay, now that you understand it, tell me the coordinates of Gulf of Mexico, which is highlighted here in the corner for them. And it gives them that example. And the actual activity gives them a whole series of places and says, okay, tell me, you now understand the grid, show me that you understand how this works, engage with it. What's the coordinates for in degrees and minutes for New Zealand, for United Kingdom, Iceland, and India? And by giving them 2 different maps, they can refer to this map and say, okay, I can see where Greenland is. They can go to the next map and see where Greenland is. They can go and look and say, oh, I understand where India is. I can see the shape of it and go back to this map and say, okay, there, I understand. India is down here and therefore I can find it. I can give it coordinates. So that is the method that I've used to say, okay, engage with your content. In the next lesson that I'm going to show you guys is, okay, we understand longitude and latitudes. We've taught them the method. We taught them the different concepts. Now, do you understand how they work? So you'll notice that the facts are given to us on the side and it's all given to us there. Why would you do that? Because I'm not asking you to memorize. I'm asking to engage. Do you understand that it's increasing from the equator outwards towards the North Pole or the South Pole? In the second example with latitudes, do you understand that it's increasing from the prime meridian going east or west? And that way I'm getting students to engage. Again, you'll notice the content is given there because I'm not testing content. I want you to understand, do you understand how to engage with the content? Does the content make sense to you? Okay, in my next lesson, what I've done is, I know I've spoken against it, but I'm saying this is what I did. I am using a topographical map, but I am not expecting them to understand the topographical map. I'm simply exposing my learners to a topographical map. I'm not asking them questions. And again, my focus is purely, if you look at the questions on it, on the actual lesson plan or the question, you'll notice there that I'm asking them again, only in degrees and minutes. I'm not asking them anything else. Even when I ask them to identify, and I kind of slowly introduce things like the key or the reference, and I say, oh, go find the tree. And it's found at place X. Now, can you draw the symbol for the key? So I'm not teaching them the conventional science, but rather I'm slowly but surely teasing them into some kind of desire to, oh, I've seen this before, I've used this before. And when they look at the map again in grade 9, which the curriculum requires us to do, they say, oh, I've seen this before, I'm familiar with it, I'm comfortable with it, therefore I can work. And so that is the big idea there. In the next lesson, I've used the concepts, the curriculum for satellite images in grade 8. They start to introduce satellite images, but look carefully at the words given to us at the bottom here. Right at the bottom, look at the word. It says they need to express their observations. So in other words, it's observation. It's not detailed content about it, because in grade 11 and 12 is where they need to understand satellite images in a lot more detail. But yeah, they're being exposed to it. Remember the idea, developmental. So that is the idea there. So express their observation. So the examples I've used to get them to understand this is this one. And again, if you look at this diagram, it's a satellite image of South Africa at night. And I've entitled my Good Evening South Africa. And I've given them a series of questions, and they are required to cut these arrows out, cut those little names out, and identify the different cities in South Africa, just purely by looking at where those brighter lights are found. Now, if I was doing this in a digital space, which I have, I can make these arrows and make these blocks into drag and drop blocks, where I can drag it and drop it to the right place. And I end up my activity saying, what can you conclude about South Africa's development from the data presented in the satellite image? In other words, I'm not teaching them development, but I'm introducing them, because I know in grade 9 they're going to do that. So they're going to look at this and say, oh, I noticed that there's a lot more lights on the East Coast. So there's an uneven development. That is what I need them to understand. That the cities that I've asked them to mention are got much brighter lights. What does that mean? Oh, it means that there's a lot more people in those areas. So that is to take that developmental approach. The next lesson that I've done is, again, dealing with satellite images. And here it's saying, let's look at satellite images and land masses, because that's what the curriculum wants. And using this idea of a satellite image, I'm asking them, can you identify deserts and semi-deserts? Draw arrows on your map to indicate each. Motivate, how did you know that this was a desert? So I'm asking them to engage with the content, because we've already given them the content of the shade, texture, etc. Now use it appropriately. And once again, drag and drop blocks can be easily made using PowerPoint, and you can use that in whiteboard, in your Microsoft Whiteboard application or any other whiteboard application. Or even if you wanted to, you can actually use it on Word as in your document. You can create the drag and drop blocks, and you can literally drag them, and move it to where you need it to be. The next series of lessons, or the next lesson that I'm going to show you is a topic which the grade 8s do, and it's the topic of satellite. Again, I'm still sticking to satellite images. I'm giving them as many different options and many different scenarios or different types of places to look at. And in this case, I looked at a satellite image of a township in South Africa. And I asked them questions about the township. And again, I'm just asking them to engage with this big understanding. What do you observe? And is it an urban, rural, or residential area? Is the settlement high, low, or middle income? Now, why did I choose settlements? Because settlements is a topic in grade 8. Now, once we see that, then you begin to understand the developmental approach that we are talking about. We are slowly introducing it. The curriculum requires that we do it, and we slowly do it. And we're using activities to get them to engage with the content instead of just filling students with content. Again, the idea, borders, images, color, is to draw students in and get them to enjoy the learning process. Our next series of lessons I'm going to look at is dealing with the following. I want to know, how do I integrate now IT skills into my lesson? How do I use programs like Word, Excel in geography? Now, some people will say, but that's got nothing to do with geography, but it does. The first lesson that I looked at was from, again, grade 8 curriculum, and it looks at climate in South Africa and factors affecting climate. And I give them a simple graph and a line graph and a bar graph, and I'm asking them to respond, take information out of there. Now in grade 10, I developed this a little further, where in grade 10, I'll show it to you now, in grade 10, I asked them to do this. I say, use this information now to draw a graph using Microsoft Word. So you're using the insert function. You're learning how to use technology in an appropriate manner. Now, in my grade 10, the activity that I've done with them was to say, okay, let's integrate technology again. And I've asked them to use their cell phones and their app. And I said, I want you to make a weather report and I want you to present it on this template. So you must take a day, 3 times a day, morning, afternoon, and evening. And I want you to put in this column, I want you to take a screenshot, print it, stick it in there, or if you're working online, you can simply paste it in. I want you to go and take a picture of the cloud images. What type of clouds there? Tell me what cloud it is. And then using the information you've accumulated, describe the weather. Now, when you look at my stickers, this is just a sample of what I've done. Each one of these block stickers were drag and drop blocks. So the student can literally drag it from one page to another page and say, oh, today is hot. So if he was in this page, what is the temperature like? Oh, put a sticker there, hot, cloudy, putting a sticker to say that. So you're using it in an imaginative way, but they're getting this idea of that I'm observing my environment, but at the same time, I'm creating a weather report. So I'm engaging with the concept of weather. I'm not just saying to them, oh, go watch the weather report and report on it, but rather they're engaging with it. And then comes this final part which says, okay, now that you've engaged with your content, let's use it and use technology appropriately. Use Word. If you are using a Word, if you are using Google Docs, a very similar function exists in Google Docs as well. And Google Docs will say to you, okay, you can insert, and it says insert graph. Put in your parameters and Word draws the graph for you. You can do it in Excel as well, and it comes out to the exact same thing. Now, so far, you notice that I haven't really started to go towards problem-based learning. So there's an example of what I've done. I started implementing and saying, okay, let's do primary research. And all of us are familiar with this. In the GD very often sends, do a primary research on. And here I'm asking students to conduct a simple primary research with a topic found in the curriculum. And I want students to discover this. I want them to discover that the content you study in school does not only apply to you, it also plays itself out in the environment you find yourself in the lives of people and all the world around you. So concepts are not just abstract, but rather they are real and people, and you see them in it. So I use the concept of birth rate. And again, notice colorful background. I use the baby emotives because I want them to kind of engage with this. Now, when you look at the topic that I've done here and how I've asked it, I've asked students, in this activity, let us make the concept of birth rate real to you. And now this is grade 10, so we're not being inappropriate in our question. So there are 2 investigation questions. How many children would you want when you are older? And ask the question, write your reason down. Is there a factor you learned about in school that can match that? Then it says, go and ask your parents. Ask your parents, ask grandparents, how many children did they want? What helped them decide what they want, how many children they wanted? And then match the factor. Like, for example, in our days, large families were common and expected. And what is that? That is a cultural factor. And we list these things, but now you've got the idea saying, okay, what I learned in school is actually true and it plays out in my environment. And that's the way we want them to engage with their content. And The next slide basically takes me into where I, with Professor Golightly, started to develop a full PBL lesson and saying, how can I implement this? And you would have heard from Professor Golightly that he wants to develop self-directed learners. Now, a self-directed learner understands already how to construct knowledge because he's done primary research examples, which I've shown you. He's worked independently as a team because they asked the questions on their own, came back to class and discussed how they came to these conclusions. What answers did people give? Did it match certain things? What are the common understandings that people had? We used IT and we skillfully used it in the classroom. We used it appropriately. So when I started looking at the project, the problem-based learning, I looked at this example from migration, and this is a topic which we found in grade 10, and I entitled my activity "Escape the Beautiful Country." I was inspired by the programs on DSTV, Escape to the Country. So I was saying, no, let's have a play on that and say, escape the beautiful country. And why are people leaving? And you'll notice I use different colors again, because I've got 3 different levels at which I want them to operate. So I want to say, why would you want to leave? Then I'll say, are the people around you, why are they wanting to leave? Those who have already left, why did they leave? And once they've got that, they already have what is now a basic source of information. Why are people leaving South Africa? And from there, we're going to come together and say, okay, what are the reasons people are giving for leaving South Africa? Is it an economic reason? Is it a social reason? Is it a political reason? And slowly they begin to engage with their content. From there, we step it up a little because now we've created a knowledge base, which they've just determined on their own through their own primary research by asking questions, by interviewing people. And just while we are there, in Word, there's a lovely little tool called Developer, which allows you to make surveys. It works exactly like Microsoft Forms or Google Forms. It gives you the tick box and you can literally tick it and tap onto it or click onto it and it will give you a tick or a cross depending on whatever you set it out to be. But it's a tool that is available in Word and we can use those tools. Then I went on to say, okay, like, now that we've done this, we're now going to start to, what Audrey said, put students into groups. And already remember I said I've got 3 sets of questions. You, people you know, people that have left. And we're trying to now bring this together and we're putting them into groups to say, okay, let's bring all this information together. And you'll notice that I said to you, give students surveys, analyze. What were the reasons given? How was the migration classified? So they formalizing the content that they've collected and they will discover that the content that should have been taught and the content that they've discovered are the same. To move on into a full PBL scenario, Escape the Beautiful Country, and you'll notice there that I'm using the same terminology that Audrey used and he still calls it a PBL scenario. So what is my topic? Well, sorry, this is jumping a bit too much. What is my topic? Migration. What type of migration? I'm looking at an external migration. I'm looking at immigration. Where is it found? It's found in the grade 10. What's the theme? Population movement. And we go on to, and then I create this theme for them. And I tell them, as South Africans, I'm creating the context for them to now begin to investigate this problem and look at the problem that they are going to be providing a solution for. Because the last line says, out of this investigation, provide possible strategies to government to turn the tide of migration out of the country. Audrey mentioned the problem demarcation and discovering it right at the bottom here says learners in their PBL groups will demarcate the problem that they will have to solve. And when we begin to look at that in our next slide, we notice that, oh, there we go. Formulation of the learning issue. This looks at what learners need to know before they can solve the problem, which Audrey spoke about. And again, pointing out the fact that we have used Bloom's taxonomy. So words like define, distinguish, identify, report, compare, discuss, analyze. Okay, so already we've created the scenario where students are saying, oh, there's the issue. Now, obviously we are in school, we can assist a lot more with providing these issues because remember, all the research that Audrey spoke about was primarily in universities. We are in a school context. We have to be aware of time and various other constraints. So we have to do some kind of assistance for students. Thereafter, we look at, Audrey spoke about the self-directed learning. And now this is where the students are going to go and investigate. They're going to ask, what is migration? What is internal versus external migration? Who have the greater potential? They're going to ask these questions and come back together and say, okay, these are the answers that we have discovered. So it says, after each group has formulated their learning issues, they should research the issues and establish a clear problem that needs to be solved. And we've kind of hinted at it in our second last point, and we spoke about the brain drain. So they should come to this point where there's the issue. People are leaving our country, and this is called the brain drain. And how do we deal with this? Then lastly, they collaborate and share, and they provide possible solutions for their problem. Again, because it's a school context, I've provided resources for them. And the resources were an article, various other links to other articles, and a few YouTube videos which I've used for them. And hopefully that now, from the beginning, when they started off in the lower grades, they've learned this ability to work with information, to engage with their content, to research, to use technology appropriately. And in so doing, then the problem, as we move up through the grades, becomes much easier to introduce. And as we get comfortable with it, because as I said to you, I'm learning, this was my very first attempt at it. And as we become familiar with it, it is expected that students will become familiar with it because the teacher is comfortable with it. And as a result, when they go to university and they walk into Professor Golightly's room and he talks about problem-based learning, they'll go like, easy, bring it on. They're not going to be like, what is this, and resist it, but rather will encourage and be ready for it, and will be able to engage with that process completely. So we are preparing our students from school through activity-based learning, through integration and problem-based learning. And when they go to universities and higher education, they are more capable and more in tune with how they are expected to operate, not only in universities, but also in real life, because that's what the world requires. The world requires students that can engage with problems, solve it, and move forward and continue. I spoke to a friend of mine just recently who worked for Nike, and he says the one thing Nike was good at was creating new scenarios on a daily basis and pushing it out to the market. He says they could do that every day, and by doing that, they literally became one of the most successful brands that you could find. He said, because they could sit there, deal with a problem, find a solution, and push it to the market within a month or a week if they needed to. And I think that's what we need to do, because when our students go out into the world, they need to engage with it. People are going to ask them to find solutions from day one. And if they can't, and if they don't have this context, I think we're going to do our country a disservice, and we're going to do our students a very, very big disservice. So I hope I've given you an idea as to how problem-based learning works. And if you have any questions and you would like to connect with me, please do so, and I will be glad to answer your questions or comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley. Thank you, Aubrey. That is like given us so much to think about. There've been some comments, and they've been discussing them. Is there anyone else that wants to ask either Aubrey or Ashley a question very quickly in like 1 minute?
Inika, I have a question for Professor Aubrey, and I just want to know, the main thing is, how do you apply something like this on a more day-to-day basis? Because the main problem that I currently have is there's so many cool things that I would like to do with the students in class that is based on this problem-based learning, but the problem is often you have limited time. And what I've done in the past is when I've presented them with something like this, I've kind of, put a lot of the responsibility on them to get some background knowledge before they come to class. And there's not always the incentive to do that. They want to be spoon-fed. So is that just a kind of mentality that has to maybe be overcome in the lower grades? Because that's my main thing. I want to implement this, but practically I've seen that the uptake from the student side is sometimes really poor.
Thank you for the question, Anneke. From my side, you will always get that students want you to give them everything.
Yes.
And we have to start challenging them. So in our case, I asked my colleagues, please, can we start implementing PBL? I said no, and I then decided, okay, I'm going to force them, and I went to the director and said, listen, yeah, I want 3 weeks from the 10, 11 weeks of a semester. I want 3 weeks for geography, for PBL. So I forced my students. And after the first year, it was struggling, they all was moaning, but with time, at the end, they all say it's the best way to go. So now it's fixed in my modules, all of the teacher, all this, it's actually PBL as part of the curriculum. So what I would suggest, sometimes the easier work, you have to go maybe quicker and then maybe select 1 week or so where you're doing PBL, and that week is PBL, but it also must be very interesting and a real world problem that they actually will enjoy. And you will see the first year, as you get more experienced in doing this and facilitate the whole process, I think definitely it will be easier. And you also do it in the next year. It must be not only a once-off, it must be implemented in different grades, hopefully with the help of other teachers as well. And then you will see the success with that. But I believe that is the way to go. We have to make plans how we will implement it, because I know we're exam-driven. Here at the university as well, what is important for the exams? And say, that is not the problem. What is important for you to learn? And that is what is challenging for me as well here. But we have to, with the help of the subject advisors from the department, I think we have to look at that. So maybe 2 weeks in a year is PBL weeks. That will be the ideal thing for me as well. But
I love that idea, yeah. Okay, thank you, Prof.
Ineke, just one question regarding inquiry-based and problem-based learning. Inquiry-based learning, you can ask, listen, you go and do inquiry regarding the 3 different types of clouds. But in PBL, you're giving them a real-world geography problem. And then they have to go and formulate the learning issues and all of that, and go and do research on that on their own. But very important, they have to work collaboratively, because that discussions, that debates, that is important. That helps stimulate higher order thinking. And also writing skills, communication skills. So that is the difference between the 2 main difference. The one is you can give them topics and they go and do research, but the other one they have to solve a problem. It was really so nice to share, hopefully, PBL with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. That was awesome. Is there anyone else that wants to ask something? No one. Right. I see we've gone over our time a little bit. Thank you so much.
Sorry.
I'm going to just put in the chat again. It's a link to a Google form. If you don't mind, just clicking on that chat link quickly and filling it in for Ashley. He'll be so happy. And then you can please just give him some feedback and maybe be part of a group to continue this discussion, which is obviously hugely important. So thank you. Thank you, everyone. We're going to put the recording onto the SAGTA website as well. So you'll be able to access it there as well. Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you for your help and assistance, Ineke. I really appreciate it.
Pleasure. Goodbye. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.